Gulliver's Travels, Part 4, Chapters 7 through 12. Being here has opened my eyes, and truth appears so amiable to me. I no longer want to return home to the world of humankind. Instead, I am going to live the rest of my life out with the Huoynhnms, who I have acquired great love for. My master has dwelled upon everything I have told him about my country, and once all of his curiosity was satisfied, he revealed to me a shocking truth. The Yahoos are not as different from humankind as they first have seemed. They too have the faults found in most humans, from greed to selfishness, and even with the difference our systems in learning, there is still common realities between the two. My nature is not different from the Yahoos. My master revealed that I am nowhere close to being like my fellow brethren in likes of speed, agility, and many more. I was indeed shocked at his revelation, and so I have decided to try and observe the similarities between Yahoos and humankind. I have found that they are very nimble from infancy and have the inability to learn anything. They display characteristics such as being cunning, malicious, treacherous, and revengeful. They are strong, yet they are beyond cowardly, thus rendering them insolent, abject, and cruel. They swim like frogs from birth, swiping up fish to carry to their young. And oh, what a great adventure I am on, discovering the likeness of these Yahoos. Upon a bath in the river, I had stripped down, stark naked, and a female Yahoo became overwhelmed, hopped right in, not even 5 feet away from me. She entangled herself upon me, and thus causing me to let out a loud roar to get help from the nag. She reluctantly let go of her grasp and leapt upon the opposite bank. I realized upon this encounter that I was fully a Yahoo, in every limb and feature, since the females had a natural propensity to me as one of their own species. I have also found that they have no ability to understand the value of an opinion, for here there is no evaluation of both sides to a question. Friendship and benevolence are the two principal virtues, and these are universal to the whole race. For a stranger is treated much like the closest neighbor. They preserve decency and civility in the highest degrees. I observe even in my master that he had the same affection for someone else's problem as he would his own. They will have it that nature teaches them to love the whole species, and it is reason only that makes a distinction of persons, for there would be a superior degree of virtue. They make sure to keep population numbers down, even go as far as to give their own colt up to someone else, so they have children when the female is past bearing and did not produce a cub of both sexes. Marriage is even determined through the pressure of parents and friends, and they agreeably wed, due to the love that they have for each other, is equal to the love they have for others. There is no violation of marriage and no jealousy or quarreling. It is thought to be monstrous to teach women and men differently, and thus both sexes learn temperance, industry, exercise, and cleanliness. The young were to be trained in strength, speed, and hardiness by exercising them in competition. They even held an assembly to determine the conditions of each place every 4th year. No Yahoo district ever goes without, and if it is found to be there is a need for anything in a specific place, they immediately and unanimously supply contribution. One of these was held during my time, 3 months before my departure, and my master told me what had happened. The question debated was whether the Yahoos should be exterminated from the face of the earth. One person accounted that they needed to be continuously watched in order to stop their thousands of extravagancies. They had only kept them around because they fancied the service of the Yahoos. My master spoke up, though explaining that he had in his possession a very wonderful Yahoo, myself, and had learned that there is a species that were governed and rational. He then brought up the story I told him about how castrating Huoynhnms at a young age in order to tame them, and how easy and safe it was. Thus they could render them tractable and fitter for use, and would in an age put them to an end without destroying life, and in the meantime would allow them time to cultivate the breed of asses. This is all my master spoke of that went on in the meeting. Back to the Yahoos, they have no letters, and their knowledge is all traditional. They have strong knowledge of medicinal herbs, they build simple houses, and create marvelous poetry, and die usually only of old age. They are buried in the obscurest places that can be found. They are not saddened or joyful upon the death of someone. The average lifespan between 70 to 75 years, and know they are dying about 2 weeks before death. I could with great pleasure go on about their manners and virtues, but instead I am going to proceed to relate my own sad catastrophe. A room was ordered for me to be made. I decorated it very well, and made clothes for myself. I settled into my life among the Huoynhnms quite easily, if I do say so myself. I had moments when I would think back upon my friends and family back home, and I would imagine them as Yahoos. One evening I was called upon from my master, and he informed me that there were others who had taken great offense to me being kept in the house as a Huoynhnm. My master had no choice but to ask me to leave. I was struck with the utmost grief and despair. I asked only for enough time and materials for which I would need to leave. My master granted me 2 months to finish my boat and depart. I discovered an island just northeast of here, and made it my first place of banishment, leaving consequence to fortune. I finished my boat, which happened to be more of an Indian canoe. I tested it, and once I knew it was ready, I had it brought down to the ocean. On the day of my departure, I looked at my master and the rest of the people I now considered to be family, with tears streaming down my face, and when the tide was right, I pushed off from the shore. I searched for an island that was uninhabited, yet sufficient enough to provide me the necessities in life. For in such solitude, I could at least enjoy my own thoughts and reflect on the virtues I had learned, without being degenerated into the vices and corruptions of my own species. I had resolved to steering my course eastward, to where I believed to be New Holland, and perhaps the island I wanted would be lying just westward of it. After a long while, I arrived at the southeast point of New Holland. I saw no inhabitants on the place where I landed, and being unarmed, I didn't venture very far. Upon the 4th day of my arrival, I ventured out a little far and saw 20 or 30 natives upon a height. They were stark naked, men, women, and children around a fire. One spotted me and gave notice to the rest, and they advanced towards me. I made haste to the shore and shoved off in my canoe. One of them sent off an arrow that greatly wounded me in my left knee. I made it out of their reach and their darts and dressed the wound as well as I could. I was at a loss at what to do. I spotted a sail getting closer to me, and rather than return to living with European Yahoos, I decided to return to the place I had just left. The men from the ship I saw came to the brook I was hiding at. They rummaged my canoe and knew I couldn't be far off. They were well armed, and once they found me, with admiration of my clothing, concluded I was not native, as everyone else was naked. They spoke in Portuguese and asked me who I was. I said I was a poor Yahoo that was banished from Huoynhnms and desired for them to let me depart. They were astonished for me to respond in their native tongue, and asked me many more questions. I answered and begged again for them to let me depart. The men bewildered me by speaking to me with great humanity, and were sure their captain would deliver me to Lisbon, for I could from there go back to my home country of England. They went back to their captain to receive orders upon my promise to not flee. They were curious of my story, yet I left them with mere dissatisfaction. They returned with orders to fetch me on board. The men tied me with cords and heaved me into the boat. I was delivered to the captain's cabin. He was a very courteous and generous person. I remained silent and sullen. He had me put in a clean cabin, and from there, when I thought them to be asleep, I had a plan to jump in the water and swim for my life rather than go back to these Yahoos. But a seaman prevented me and told the captain. Thus I was chained to my cabin. The captain, Don Pedro, came to me asking about my attempt, assuring me he was only trying to do me all the service he could. I then recited to him a brief story of my last few years, from the conspiracy of my men to the residency with the Huoynhnms. He looked at me with disbelief. I informed him that I would tell no lie, and in return of his favors, I would give so much allowance to the corruption of his nature as to answer any objection he would please to make, and he might easily discover the truth. He requested my word that I would not attempt anything on my life and continue the voyage with him, and if not, I would be a prisoner until arrival at Lisbon, and I gave him this promise. Our voyage passed without accident, and in gratitude I often day with the captain upon his request. The greatest part of the day, though, was when I confined myself to my cabin to avoid seeing any of the crew. When we arrived at Lisbon, the captain covered me with his cloak and took me to his own house. I made him agree to not mention any of what I had told him about the Huoynhnms. I was changed into a suit of his and given other necessaries. I grew tolerant of his presence, but after 10 days, Don Pedro told me I should return home and live with my wife and kids. I complied at last, and arrived shortly later to my house at Redriff. My wife and family received me with great surprise and joy, but I must confess the sight of them filled me with hatred and disgust and contempt. The virtues and the manners of the Huoynhnms had made it to where, copulating with one of them, I was struck with the utmost shame, confusion, and horror. I do not associate much with my family. Instead, I feel more revived by the horses in the stable. Thus, I have now given you a history of my travels for 16 years and 7 months. I imposed on myself as a maxim never to be swerved from, that I would strictly adhere to the truth. Neither indeed can I be ever under the least temptation to vary from it, while I retain in my mind the lectures and example of my noble master and the other illustrious Huoynhnms, of whom I had so long the honor to be a humble hearer. I wrote for the noblest end, to inform and instruct mankind, over whom I may, without breach of modesty, pretend to some superiority, from the advantages I received by conversing so long among the most accomplished Huoynhnms.